Hi, so today is the 5th of November 2021. Make sure to check out my website, www.susanmeeling.com. I've been known by a few names other than Susan MeeLing. That's kind of my author name, but I've also gone by that for years before I ever got into modeling, and that particular name being Lady Dori Belle. For those who may or may not remember, I don't know. I haven't ever been officially asked or reminded of. So anyway, or however you want to put that. So back in 2000, I had a head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000. Hence how I put that together. I dealt with a lot of doctors because I had a head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000, and I was 17 years old. In the time frame after I woke up from my coma, again, I don't know how long I was in a coma. There's been a few issues in regards to the fact that I was in a coma. That and certain documentation, those who understand that when it comes to various situations in the military sometimes when you have certain backgrounds. And so I was 17 years old when I was in the Army. I had to fight to be able to be emancipated. I've gone over that before. For those who remember me in person, I've also done some writing. Once again, go to my website, www.susanmeeling.com, to find a few things, pun intended. And so in the year of 2000, towards the end, I had been taken off of a military installation after having gotten off of restriction because of who is my son and my daughter's biological father. Because I was told certain things and I didn't believe that that was a good idea at the time. I didn't understand why I was on restriction. If I had been explained the reasons in comparison to what had occurred, it would have made more sense to me. Especially since they had to teach me the names of colors. They had to teach, the Army taught me the names of colors. The Navy and the Marine Corps taught me how to count to 10. The Army taught me rank all over again, and I knew the UCMJ before I had actually been enlisted, among a few other things. So in 2000, around October, is when getting the apartment off of the military installation with my son and my daughter's biological father. And because of what was explained to me, I was told to keep some of my belongings in the actual room. So that way it wouldn't look, I can't remember what he said, but it wouldn't look weird or something, or it wouldn't be something that would throw off the military. I don't know. I can't remember the specifics. Again, I hadn't been out of my coma for a very long amount of time. And so, and I still had the subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain. That was still there up until about the year of 2007. So at that point in October of 2000, how bad the subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain is in my medical records. So get an apartment, it was in Lincoln Green, and that was where a guy he had known, meaning my children's biological father, my now dead ex-husband. I was in a different part of the city and hadn't seen him in 2 days, by the way, when it comes to that, as well as there was a whole bunch of pictures in reference to the dress blues that were done at JCPenney Portraits in 2007. But going back to the point, I had been back and forth between the military base, Fort Sam Houston, going to being at wherever I was working at the time, and then afterwards going back to the apartment. And so nobody knew at the time. I was told to do things a certain way because I didn't get told why, other than it was supposed to be I was told it was that I didn't need to be on a military post because of him having been in college. And at that time, I was working in ISR. Randomly, I also worked in a few other areas. And this is before it became Warrior Transition Unit and moved by a few years. So I was told that I didn't need to be on post and that it was more different in regards of me being off of post. And it didn't make sense to me. And again, I was only out of my coma for a little while. So, and then there's also the Brackenridge situation, which was even less time from waking up from my coma. And that was the Austin rave situation. So, I had been in Lincoln Green Apartments for a while, and then I was put on temporary retirement duty leave in December or November of 2000. And instead of going to Illinois, I went to the apartment. And I was told I shouldn't say instead of going to Illinois, I wasn't able to get a ticket to go to Illinois because nobody showed me how. And so I was taken from Fort Sam Houston to the apartment, Lincoln Green Apartments, and all of my stuff was picked up from Fort Sam Houston and taken over to Lincoln Green Apartments for the last part of it. And so I was told by the guy who I had done the out processing with that so the guy told me that I needed to go back to Illinois for the time frame between, it was a 30-day thing. It was something about what's it called? When you're in the Army for a certain amount of time, you have 30 days of leave, I guess is what it's called. And so I was told that I needed to go to Illinois, but nobody showed me how to get a ticket to Illinois to go. And so I was taken from, again, this is in reference to my son and my daughter's biological father. I was taken from Fort Sam Houston after meeting with that male with my out processing paperwork, where I was told I was supposed to go to Illinois, but I didn't know how to get there. And so then I was taken over to the Lincoln Green Apartments. And I was told I had to do certain things as far as getting a job. I did what I could to have a job. I worked at a matchmaker place. It was called Together at the time. And I had to go to the Justice of the Peace during the time frame instead because of how that went. And it was found that I was pregnant. And so that was why I was the Justice of the Peace. And so I was, I think in total, I was maybe 6 months out of my coma at the time, and I still had the subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain. And when going to my first OBGYN appointment, as far as the doctor appointments for that, I gave my medical history, because you have to, in order to get medical treatment. It's kind of a thing. And so I had informed them of my head injury and the coma portion, and the OBGYN that I had wanted to know how long my coma was, and I told him I don't know. I had arranged my neurology appointments over at Lackland Air Force Base in Wilford Hall. So I started getting all of my neurology appointments, my OBGYN appointments were there. Same thing for life skills, biofeedback, a few other types of appointments over the years from 2001 on and off until about 2007, 2008. And so the OBGYN at Lackland Air Force Base knew all of the same thing as my neurologist that was over there at Wilford Hall. Same thing with the life skills as well as the biofeedback and all those different types of appointments for years. And the doctors all knew because they did the MRIs and the CAT scans out there at Wilford Hall. I mean, Fort Sam Houston had done some at Brooke Army Medical Center as well, but once I was out processed and on temporary retirement duty leave, then was when Wilford Hall had taken over those particular appointments. And I used to see, I remember it was Major Grimes, that was who I had seen when I was at Fort Sam Houston, and when I had, it was every 3, 6, 8, or 12 months that the letters showed up that I needed to schedule my reevaluations for the temporary retirement duty leave. By the year of 2004 is when I had received paperwork saying that I was fully retired. I already had my blue ID card, and but all of those doctors had been informed of the after effects because they had all of the medical records and all of my appointments being at Lackland Air Force Base in comparison to Fort Sam Houston at Brooke Army Medical Center, or now it's San Antonio Medical Center, and it's Military City, USA. And so I had gone to the appointments over at Wilford Hall starting around, I think it was February of 2001. And so all of the appointments that I went through, they were taken care of at Wilford Hall. And they all knew that I still had the subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain. And so when it came time to actually deliver my son, just the same in reference to delivering my daughter in 2002, which I still had that subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain, I was informed that both of them in 2001 and then 2002, they were about 2 weeks late by the scheduling and some blood work and other factors of. So then when I was 2 weeks late, they had to induce labor for both my son and my daughter. And inducing labor means you get your membranes stripped out, and I was sent home both times when I had been 2 weeks late already. And the OBGYN in 2001 didn't want to pay attention to the fact that I was less than a full year out of my coma by the time of being pregnant. I hadn't even had my head injury yet by the time I actually started going to Wilford Hall. And so they were all informed as far as the medical portions. And where some have been wondering in different discussions as to how I had survived. Well, I lived. I went to doctor's appointments. I kept breathing. That's definitely a tell sign on that one. I still, breathe in and breathe out. I can make fun of myself that way. Anyway, so I had informed these doctors at Wilford Hall, just as over at Brooke Army Medical Center at the time. And at Wilford Hall, I had gone to the neurology, as I said, and OBGYN. Well, the OBGYN had a bit of a problem because I was 18 years old at the time and had seen that I had a blue ID card. And I was asked a lot of questions because why would I, as an 18-year-old who didn't graduate basic training, have a blue ID card? And I informed the doctor as far as my medical, and I was informed that he did not believe that that was a good enough reason for me to have a blue ID card. And I informed him that that wasn't my decision, and the decision for my blue ID card was made above his pay grade. He did not like that response. He also didn't like the fact that I was 18 years old, that I didn't graduate basic training, that I am the sponsor, and all that sort of stuff. He made his opinion known in a multitude of my OBGYN appointments. And it was one of those, I don't know what to tell you. If you have a problem with that, that's between you and the Army, not between you and I. Your job is to be a doctor. Your job is to make sure that my medical is taken care of properly in comparison for the OBGYN. Other doctors, their job is to do their job. It's very simple. He didn't really like my attitude. He said that I was too military for him, which was very odd because it was one of those, you are in the military, we're on a military installation. Kind of weird that you would be throwing a temper tantrum about me being military, knowing that I'm the sponsor. And so he had his opinions, and I still had the subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain. I will leave it. I mean, I do have my own personality. And so I'm just going to say that that subarachnoid hemorrhage head injury probably fully removed that filter that I once had. Ish. And so, because I was born and raised in New Jersey in the 1980s and then raised in there in the 1990s as well. So it is what it is. And so the doctor in OBGYN, in comparison to the neurologist was great. He was helpful, and we discussed the different medications and the references of, but the OBGYN had a big issue because of me being my age. My age had nothing to do with it as far as his job. His job wasn't to judge me about my age. I mean, by all accounts, I was legally married, and what does it matter to him? Realistically, if anything should have mattered, it was the fact that I had a subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain still, and he wasn't paying attention to those details. In my opinion. So later, when being 2 weeks late, that same OBGYN had stripped my membranes and then sent me home. And then a few days later, I went into the emergency room because I started to have contractions. And I didn't dilate enough, so they sent me back home with some barbiturates. And I had already been to the emergency room a few times while I was pregnant with my son, mainly because of the situation I was in. So one particular appointment in the emergency room was because I had watched a movie and it was the Exorcist movie. I hadn't ever seen a rated R movie up to that point. I was all grown up. I could actually watch a rated R movie because of the way I grew up. I didn't have permission to watch certain movies. I could watch any G-rated movie as a child. So when I was old enough, I could, because I was biologically 18, so I could pick out any movie I wanted to see. And so picked out a few movies, but I picked out The Exorcist, got the documentary version, because it was however many decades from the first movie making of. And following day, I had gotten back from work, and my children's biological father, his car was in the parking lot area, but he didn't answer when I had gone in the apartment. So I ran around, did some stuff in the kitchen area after going through the living room, and then I checked on my pet. I had a pet that I named Methuselah, and that was a ghost corn snake. And then I went to the bedroom area, and I didn't have any response when I went through my apartment. So I got onto the bed because my head was hurting really badly. I had headaches and migraines, and the bed mattress started shaking. And I freaked out because I literally had just watched The Exorcist. I was scared. I slept with the lights on because I hadn't ever, I knew that stuff was real. I grew up going to Old Tenet Presbyterian Church. I watched what happened after they took care of the casket situation as far as William Tennant. So no, I knew that was real. So that's why I slept with the lights on. Because no, that was, they started seeing apparitions. And I had already been seeing General George Washington's spirit out back. So yeah, no. I was sleeping with the lights on. I totally was. I don't care, I was 18 years old. That movie scared me. I admit it. And so I had gotten up to run from the bed, and I got onto the floor, and when I went to run, my children's biological father, my now dead ex-husband, he grabbed my ankle, and I fell face down when running away. And I started having these feelings in my stomach, or uterus, I guess is the way to put it. And so I had to be taken to the emergency room for that. And instead of being able to explain what happened in a more detailed situation, again, I didn't really have the choice that some people think I had. And so I had the subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain still. And I went from college algebra with trigonometry and calculus to second grade math. And I had to be taught rank, and I had to be taught the name of colors and how to count all over again. And so at Wilford Hall, in the emergency room, they checked me out, made sure that my pregnancy was going okay, and then sent me home. There was another situation where it was said that the handprint on my pregnant belly was because of one of the dogs being on the couch. By technicalities, one of the dogs were on the couch. The dog was protecting me. And there was a situation, and the dogs went to protect me. Sasha is that particular dog. That one went to Grandma and Grandpa Nichols' house because of how much Sasha went to protect me from that particular situation. And so had to go to the emergency room for that because that was how hard my pregnant belly was hit. And so at Wilford Hall, several other appointments. There were several. They had the knowledge, they had the medical documentation, and even though I couldn't explain it, I also didn't know what the term was. I didn't know that was considered abuse. And with certain ways I was raised, that just seemed that I was in a situation that was considered normal, because I explained it to people in San Antonio, and the people that I spoke with said that there wasn't anything that they thought I should be concerned about. I felt otherwise. It was also my life in comparison to theirs. And so Terry, which was my children's biological father friend who had worked at ISR, as I was told, and had also been stationed in South Korea along the DMZ, had got me a job at Chili's, which is where his then wife had worked. Her name was Lisa, and there were a bunch of individuals that got involved with Temple of Flesh that were in that Chili's at Days of Allah and I-10 near the UTSA, which was the same college that my children's biological father was going to. He started out at San Antonio Community College before transferring to UTSA, but that's where that began. And so I don't know if that's a more normal or common factor in San Antonio, but that's something to take into consideration because of the medical portion and as many aspects that are there in consideration. And so I went to Lackland and at Wilford Hall, and they knew about everything that was going on. They were informed. They had my medical records transferred over there, everything. It's not that they didn't know. So when I was 2 weeks past due, they induced labor and then sent me home. They had already, again, same doctor, knew that I had the subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain. Same doctor that had a problem with the fact that I was 18 years old. He tried to get me to tell him why I had a blue ID card, and I told him it was none of his business beyond my medical. And he didn't like that. He had told me that he could make my delivery more difficult, and I told him that he would pay for that severely if he did. So he thought that I was joking, and I was not. So I had been sent back and forth because I had gone to the emergency room being in labor for several different times. The first time was I think it was less than 20, it was either 24 or 48 hours later, went to the emergency room, they checked, I wasn't dilated enough. Went back again a couple of days later. I still wasn't dilated enough. They gave me barbiturates to go to sleep. Walked around. My biological mother, biological father, and biological sister showed up from Illinois to San Antonio. Then when my water actually broke, they were watching a police academy movie, and they had told me to hold on to being ready to deliver my son after having already had those amount of time where my membranes were stripped. So then after they finished watching a whole police academy movie or two, then they felt that it was important enough to actually take me to the emergency room to actually get the medical care that I actually needed, having had my membranes stripped, and they made the choices they did. And so went to the emergency room again. That was the third time. and third or fourth time, I can't remember, third or fourth time. And the doctors said, oh, well, since you've had your membrane stripped about 7 days ago, I guess we can admit you to the hospital. We can take you up to labor and delivery. My contractions were getting stronger at that point. You know, it was just 7 days of that. And then a few days went by and that OBGYN had come in and he was like, well, you haven't had your, it didn't dilate enough yet. You're only a centimeter or two dilated. So they gave me Pitocin to add to the contractions as well as the stripped membranes and all that stuff. And then I was put on magnesium because imagine that after about 8 or 9 days, I developed an infection after 8 or 9 days of that. And so they gave me a few other things to actually get rid of the infection, but that particular doctor wouldn't listen to me and just do a C-section. He tried to tell me that he knew better and he had gone to whatever medical school as he already had done so in prior appointments. And I said, I don't care what your medical degree is. Obviously, it's an expensive piece of toilet paper because I've been in labor for over a week. You could have done a C-section and I could be holding my son right now if you would have just done your job to begin with. But since you want to go and take as much sweet time, you typical Zoomie of you, I would really like to actually get this on, okay? And he didn't happen to like my attitude because apparently, in his opinion, I was being rude after being in labor for over 9 days. So then, I looking back now in 2021, comparatively, I think I was pretty calm. I mean, by all accounts, I think I was pretty calm. So, it's my opinion. I admit my bias because I'm evaluating myself on that one. So, he didn't get over his attitude or his ego. And I very much informed him while I was in labor dealing with a migraine, not forgetting, gotta remember that subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain. You know, he was throwing a titty baby temper tantrum. He didn't like being told that he was throwing a titty baby temper tantrum. He also didn't like the fact that I didn't agree that I should have a natural delivery. I should just get a C-section. But again, reminder after reminder of his opinion when it came to his medical degree. And I lost it, and I said at a different time when, again, he wouldn't even do an epidural. I was in the hospital for over 5 days before I actually got an epidural, because if they gave me an epidural, then the dilation wouldn't be as bad. Or as quick, I should say. The dilation of the cervix wouldn't have gone as quickly. And it's like, well, you know, I've already had my membrane stripped this long. Do you think you could do your job? I don't think so, because apparently you're not getting the memo. I don't care that you seem to think you're a medical professional. You obviously are just practicing. Why don't you take your head out of your and do your job? And he had an attitude problem, and it was, I don't really care. You are doing stupid stuff. I don't have patience for this. I'm dealing with a ridiculous amount of pain. Get over your ego. Your ego means nothing to me. And then there was a problem with one of the nurses. So I start having really big contractions, because by this point, it's about 2 or 3 days with Pitocin and the magnesium and all that sort of stuff. So the machine is literally picking up that I'm about to start to have a contraction. And I, being me and pregnant, I can feel it. Those who have been pregnant and delivered a child, you know what I mean. You know what it feels like. And so this female comes over, and she has shorter hair, it's about here, a dirty blonde, and she goes to put a blood pressure cuff on me. And I'm in the middle of a contraction that's starting to get worse, and you know, ow, it's ow, because those who know. And so she tells me to calm down. And I told her a few New Jersey words. A lot of New Jersey words. A lot of New Jersey words. And she went to put the blood pressure cuff off me, and I backhanded her. And she said that I was being a difficult patient. Well, you know, maybe in the middle of a contraction is not the smartest time to go and put a blood pressure cuff on. I have a feeling that in the middle of a contraction, my blood pressure might be raised. And the OBGYN male doctor had said, what would you know? Do you have a medical degree? This is literally his words. And I look at him, I go, I don't care about your bleepity, bleepity, bleep, 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 bleepity, bleep, 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 bleepity, bleep, 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 medical degree. It's a really expensive piece of toilet paper. Let me reiterate that to you. And that's all it's ever going to be, in my opinion. And so he got offended because I was in the Army, and he had actually brought that up to a different appointment where you're in the Army, you think that you deserve Air Force medical treatment. Excuse you. It should be equal across the board, thank you very much. Why would you and your people in the Air Force get better medical treatment than those in the Army? You already get specialty pay when you show up and go and have to stay at an Army base. You get specialty pay when you go to a Marine Corps base. Why do you happen to get better medical care too? You spoiled, and we did not get along. we did not get along. I was so calm though, in my opinion, despite his titty baby temper tantrums. So anyway, so back to the delivery on whatever day number that I'm in the hospital by that point. I still haven't gotten an epidural. I've had Pitocin for however many days at that point. And this female keeps trying to do a blood pressure cuff. Well, the machine is showing her that I'm having a contraction, my pain levels, obviously, and then the fact that you can see a contraction when it comes to the exterior of a pregnant stomach. And so she gets backhanded a time or two. And then she tried climbing on top of me in the bed, and I just kicked her across the room. Just like a little flick in a different reference of Corona, but I literally got my foot right in between her sternum and kicked straight across. And she ironically hit the side of the armoire and then bounced into the wall. And then she fell. And it was as it was. I finished my contraction. The pain started calming down because I wasn't having a contraction. She was laying on the floor, and I said, so now you can do my blood pressure, all right? And she looked at me weird. While I looked at her weird, because you're a female. How stupid do you have to be? He has no excuse as far as being a doctor. So, you know, what is this garbage? And so what are you? Are you even a nurse? Are you even a doctor? Like, what are you doing here? Where is, you know, I mean, the ridiculousness of these two. And so the female gets up, she goes to do the blood pressure, and she was like, well, you know, if you didn't have an attitude, maybe your blood pressure would be calmer. I look over at her, and a bunch of New Jersey words came out. It was just like, so many New Jersey words. And so we go back and forth, and a few more days go by. And then I finally get an epidural. Finally. You know, it only took over 7 days after my membranes were stripped, and you know, just a couple more days after being on Pitocin, and then a few more days after being on Pitocin with the magnesium, before I finally had the luxury of getting an epidural. Oh, wow. Apparently that was considered a luxury, according to the OBGYN male and the female. They considered that a luxury. They also told me it was because of my age and my blue ID card. First and foremost, my blue ID card was none of their business. And anybody who understands certain things, when you go and cause certain problems because you want to try to get intel that is not your intel to have, it does not matter if I go to a medical facility that is paid for by the insurance company, not you. If you don't understand that, that is your fault as a medical practitioner in that regard for OBGYN in reference to that male and then that female. So fast forward, I deliver my son, and it just took like essentially 2 weeks to 2.5 weeks. And, I made the joke where he didn't want to leave. He's holding on my rib cage like, no, I don't want to go out there. I've heard what's going on. No. I've heard what my biological father sounds like. No, let me stay in here. Please keep me here, right here. Please. I made that joke back then for years. Same thing with my daughter. I did the same thing where she was holding on my rib cage, grabbing on my spine, going, no, Mom, please, can I stay here? You protect me. No, you protect me. I don't want to go. Although there is the reality of stuff. So when it comes to my daughter, the same thing occurred. They said that I was 2 weeks early. They did the membrane stripping, but instead of that, where the joke was that I looked like the female in The Exorcist because of how many people were getting chewed out. Which, by technicalities, it's one of those, after being in labor for a few days, a couple of weeks, yeah, I might hypothetically have a little bit of an attitude, and I might have a few things to say to you. Just saying. And if you get offended because after all of that, you want to pretend that you're innocent, I don't think so. No, you don't get to do that. You go and add Pitocin to that? No, you go and make my pain worse? No, you have every right to get every chewing out, and I'll go and do as I choose. Because you're going to deal with that. You know about the subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain. You know about all of these situations, and you haven't actually taken care of it. You've added to the problems needlessly. You're gonna deal with it. And if you don't like the fact that I called you a Zoomy, well, you know what? It's better than what I could have called you. So how about you get over your little ego? And but you know what? That's why you're a Zoomy, because you had feelings and they zoom on by in comparison to those zipper-headed sun gods that go flying overhead that you wish you could be good enough for. Because sometimes you just need to learn to keep your feet on the ground and actually pay attention to the details correctly, because obviously you didn't get your medical stuff correctly because you are a medical practitioner in comparison. But sure, you consider yourself a doctor, even though it's a PhD who is a doctor. You're actually a physician, medical practitioner in comparison, but you want to shorten things and make things easier for you, and then you want to claim that you're above anything. No, I don't think so. We did not get along at all. I was a little feisty. I was a smidgen feisty for that one. And so, in my defense, he was in the Air Force and I was in the Army. So, and he didn't like the other fact that I had brought up during one of my earlier appointments in OBGYN, that the Air Force came from the Army. And he didn't like that. And he tried to tell me that the Air Force was founded on its own, and I said, yeah, but it was founded through the Army. If it wasn't for the Army, the Air Force wouldn't be. It was during World War II, or in between World War I and World War II, but it started in the Army. And there's also the Marine Corps version, and you gotta remember that the Navy has airplanes. So you're not as special of snowflakes as you seem to think you are. We really did not get along. Mind you, this was on Lackland Air Force Base, that I was arguing with the Air Force OBGYN doctor about military history. In my defense earlier, less than a year before, I fought to listen to Eminem on the army, and I got to listen to my Eminem. So going and I guess upping that, going from I want to listen to Eminem, and I want to listen to Eminem, and you're going to listen to Eminem because I want to listen to Eminem. I don't care, Mark Spurrier, I want to listen to Eminem. And then listening to Eminem. I one-upped myself on New Jersey attitude. And by telling an Air Force physician that which is funny because being an OBGYN and then being Army and then telling the OBGYN doctor that if it wasn't for the Army, the Air Force wouldn't have been birthed. That's just kind of an additional little irony on top of that. But yeah, he didn't like the fact that I had explained that the Air Force came from the Army and then I was pregnant. And then there's the really twisted irony. And I was huge when I was pregnant. I gained over 70 pounds with my son. My son later learned when he was a teenager not to call because we were talking about my weight and he tried to say that he didn't make me as fat as his sister did when I was pregnant with him. And he was a teenager. He was educated. As to you do not ever make any reference to a female being pregnant, whether during that time, because I didn't go into the fact that his biological father had called me a beached whale when I was pregnant, because I had ironically eaten a 1 pound bag of M&Ms, peanut butter M&Ms to be specific, pretty much every day for about 2 months, and the OBGYN had asked me how I had gotten so fat. Yet again, a male, and you know, I had a few New Jersey words. The one appointment that my now dead ex-husband, my son and my daughter's biological father had been at, what just so happened to have to be that one. And you know, being pregnant, the emotions and hormones, and yeah, I cried like a baby, but I was pregnant with one, so whatever it is, it is. And it, you know, I gained 30 pounds in a month, which realistically, my son had actually caused me to gain more weight, because I went from 106 pounds when I had initially found out that I was pregnant to 193 pounds or so. And so between the pregnancy of my son and my daughter, I only lost about 30 pounds. And so I was just about 210 pounds when I delivered my daughter. I was hugely pregnant. You could not miss that, and that is what it is at that time. And so, in reference to my daughter and that, same OBGYN, same sorts of issues. Oh, you're, knocked up again. Well, since it's your job, that's kind of what you do. If I'm not pregnant, or if females aren't pregnant, what's your job then? And he looked at me and he goes, that's not the correct response. And I looked at him and I said, I grew up in New Jersey, and before I was born and was the first living baby Jesus Christ out in New Jersey for the first live nativity, there were a lot of females that were having problems getting pregnant. So you might want to watch your attitude, okay? Because there could be some issues. And, if you want to upset me and insult me in comparison, then what is your job going to be if you're not an OBGYN? Because if you don't have females who are pregnant to deliver children, what's the problem there? Do you happen to see any problems with that? And that particular OBGYN, oh, you're being over dramatic or whatever. No, I'm letting you know this is the facts. This is the facts. So we had it out, and it's one of those, if I choose to, I choose to. Don't be don't be messing with that, because you don't know. You have no idea what I can, you just don't know me. So we'll just leave it at that. And he and I did not get along at all very well. He had a problem with my attitude, because mainly I was correct. And since I didn't have a degree, he didn't like that. Excuse me. Anyway, so he had a problem with my attitude. I had a problem with his ego and his arrogance. Yeah. Although I didn't start it. I know that sounds childish, but since I was pregnant at the time, he started it, and it was as it was. So we went back and forth, had a few issues, and when it came time to deliver my daughter, the same thing, the stripped membranes, the on and on as far as, but the pain levels weren't as bad, because in comparison, I already went through it, so it wasn't nearly as painful. There is that reality of certain desensitizing factors. And so I was in the room however many days in. I think it was about 6 or 7 days in the hospital by that point. And, the nurse decides to check on me. Decides. It did take that much time. And so this nurse comes in, and she's hiding behind the door, and she goes, "Are you?" And she goes over my information, and I go, yeah, that's me. And she goes, and then she comes back in and she goes, and she starts reading more of the information. "Are you sure and yeah. Do you need to check my ID? Do you need to?" And she goes, "I'm just reading over the charts in your notes. And according to the notes in your charts, it says that you're a difficult patient. It says you're this, it says you're that, da-da-da." I said, "Oh, that's because I was in labor for this long and da-da-da, and they weren't doing this and they weren't doing that and they weren't doing this. So instead of actually doing their job, they just probably threw a bunch of titty baby temper tantrums because I didn't get along with the doctor. So instead of actually being honest and being unbiased the way they're supposed to be, apparently he and the nurse, especially the one that I kicked across the room, and she goes, 'Oh, you got to tell me about this, because I can't stand that female.' And so I was like, 'Oh, well, let me tell you.' So I go into the details. She's like, 'You kicked her across the room? Oh, this is going to be awesome. I can't wait to tell all the other nurses at lunch,' and da-da-da-da. So it was as it was. But yeah, in my charts, they had put down that I was a difficult patient, and it's like, well, why would you? And I told the nurse this that had come in during 2002, that, well, why would you say that I'm difficult when you're trying to put a blood pressure cuff on me in the middle of a contraction? And she said that they had had problems with certain nurses and certain doctors that were doing certain things, and went over a few things, and she was like, well, we can't do anything as far as an epidural. That is an actual thing, but can give you Pitocin. Not Pitocin, Demerol. And I was like, okay, well, it's better than nothing because of the pain levels. And so they did not do the Pitocin the same way. I still got Pitocin, but it wasn't the same type, I guess. I don't know, different batch or whatever. We went round and round, and in reference to that nurse and I, and discussing things. And she didn't realize the level of problems from that particular OBGYN, as well as that particular nurse. And so I went over a bunch of the different details. My son had been in the ICU for 3 days, whereas my daughter didn't need to be in the ICU at all. And so there were a bunch of situations that we didn't see eye to eye. And it was all because of that OBGYN male who had an attitude because he didn't like the fact that I had a blue ID card. It literally started over my blue ID card and being medically retired at that point in time, because he tried to go on about how long he had been in, and it was one of those, I understand that, I'm not being disrespectful to your service. However, you have to understand the fact that you may be an officer, good for you. There are those people who, whatever rank they are, your job is still your job. Your bias is absolutely unacceptable. I don't care who you seem to think you are. I don't care what work you put into things, because unless you actually earn it, if you get passed over for a promotion because your job in what you're doing, you're not up to par, well, maybe you should step up your stuff and actually do something that's worthwhile in comparison to the temper tantrum that you're throwing in my appointment. I don't care. I don't care about your attitude. I don't care about your opinion. I didn't ask any of that. Your job is to only take care of my appointment stuff. So stop being stupid. Get over your ego, and he tried saying, well, look at my wall of plaques and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, your I love me wall means nothing to me. It's important, but that's all for you and your little specialty stuff. You think you're special? Well, do something special that's actually worthwhile in comparison to the arrogance that you've been showing. I don't have a patience for that. I don't have and you need to really truthfully accept the fact that if you don't like that you're dealing with someone who was in the Army, because he was actually insulted having to have me as a patient. It was one of those, I'm gonna make things very difficult for you. I don't think you understand. You might think that I'm a difficult patient, but that's only because of your attitude. As long as you throw an attitude at me, I will put you in your place when you are incorrect. And if you don't like that, I don't care. You need to get over your ego, because what is it that you've done? Oh, you got your OBGYN. Okay, good for you. So then do your job. Because I don't know if you know this, there are other smarter, faster, and what have you, OBGYNs, and this is the Air Force. It's funny, you have the name Azumi, and you haven't picked that up. What is wrong with you? We did not get along, is one way to put it. He didn't like it, and I didn't care. And see, that's a problem with certain types of physician practitioners, that they think that they know everything just because they went to school. And this was something that I had explained to him, was just because you went to school, and what year is that? You graduated in 19 what? Do you know how much development and technology and science has occurred? The fact that you want to try to go and do that, and this is why it's called a medical practice. You haven't gotten it down correct yet. You don't like it? That's too bad. Work on it. Actually do something. And he tried to ask me during the time frame of when I was pregnant with my daughter, well, what would you recommend? How about you not worry about that, because that's my intellectual property. Thank you very much. And you're going to give me the credit that I earned, because I'm not playing your game. I won't allow that. I'll just stop completely if I have to, because you are not going to hold me hostage in that reference. I won't allow it, because you are going to give me the credit that I earned. That's just the reality. And we did not get along, is really what it boiled down to. And so this occurred in reference to who's my son and my daughter's biological father, my now dead ex-husband, where it was known that I had not been out of a coma for longer than 2.5 years when I delivered my daughter, by these same so-called medical professionals at Wilford Hall in 2002. So while this OBGYN didn't pay attention to that, didn't care, nor did any of the medical individuals at the time, because they were insulted that somebody from the Army was going to Wilford Hall. Never mind the fact that the Army didn't actually have an OBGYN or a delivery ward at that point. So it just made more sense to just go to Wilford Hall at the time. And so we went round and round about quite a few things, both in 2001 and 2002. And there is that problem where certain people have certain issues that they need to just let it go. That's really what it is that you just need to let it go. You didn't like it, and an OBGYN and sort of stuff, you need to let that go because you got other stuff to do. And so however you want to view the technology portion, in regards to quite a few things, because my son was born the 2nd of September 2001, I'll leave it at that. In regards to my son was born the 2nd of September 2001. The Air Force obviously uses a lot of technology. How they choose to view that in reference to 9 days later is how they choose to view that. Because now it's being called the Space Force in a little bit. I know how the transitionary stuff goes, but the irony is you still are birthed from the Army by technicalities, especially with pictures and videos, and a few other situations as a hypothetical. Anyway, that's gotta just burn. It is what it is. So, yeah, that's what had happened. And so then I delivered my daughter, and my son was in the room when I had delivered my daughter because their biological father had, he had other females to be around at that time. So it was as it was in that reference. And, what is loyalty and fidelity and all that? Legal marriage only, obviously. And so the aspects of that was as it was when in reference to after delivering my son in comparison to after delivering my daughter, I didn't have to be hospitalized. And same thing with my son and my daughter. Neither one of them. My son had to be hospitalized a few days after the attacks on the 11th of September 2001. I had to be hospitalized about a month after that because of the fact that Wilford Hall had not properly done the work that they were tasked to do. And so that is what it was back in 2001, though, in comparison to now. There's no need for that now, obviously, because I'm not living in Texas by choice in that regard. So there's that, because there's no way to make up for that. And I'm not interested in that particular way. I'm very much, if there's any hypothetical connection in reference to that situation with the OBGYN, there are proper ways to actually fix and repair that correctly in comparison to any sort of stalking, harassing, or other needless problems in that reference. And so they can contact me with that offer in comparison to however that would be viewed. Nonetheless, because that is what it is, they're the ones that had that particular set of individuals. And then the irony of that 4th of July and how many children I saved. Just saying, you can, however you view that. Just something like 10, 15 children, getting them out of a bounce house, while putting my son and my daughter on a teacup ride, so that way I could go and get the children after calling all of the people, there might have been some soldiers. They were all in uniform, and they grabbed a hold of the strings from the bounce house, and the parents and grandparents and I went and got the children out of the bounce house from that 4th of July. I think it was 2005. No, I think it was 2006. I think it was 2000. Yeah, I'm fairly certain it might have been 2006. And so with that real quick, my son and my daughter, my biological mother, biological father, and then I know my son and my daughter's biological father, and if I'm accurate, I think even that situation, because of the garage, Cactus Jack, also known as Jeffrey Kirkendall Jr., were there, and my children's biological father and Cactus Jack went walking wherever they went. I had heard something when it came to the bounce house, and there was the teacup ride there. So I look at my son and my daughter, I'm like, hey, do you guys want to go on the teacup ride with Grandma Hall? And they're like, yeah, great, yay, woohoo. And I'm like, just make sure you spin it really, really fast. And they were like, yeah, yay. You're welcome, Lackland Air Force Base MPs. You know what I'm talking about. And so... Balance for you guys. I was looking at being an MP, so I know it's called something different, but that's my, And so, because of 2005. And so my son and my daughter and my biological mother, they get on the teacup ride. I look over at my biological father, who's got his arms on the railing. I look over and I go, I need you to hold this. And he's like, what is this? And I'm like, it's my purse and my camera bag. And he's like, okay, why? And I'm like, I just gotta go, hold on a second. And right when I turn around, these ropes snap. And it's funny because I can make a joke. And so, because of course it's strings. And so the ropes were thicker than this. So I can make a joke. But anyway, so the ropes snap, and I scream out to the different guys in uniform, that tell them which way to go as far as grabbing the ropes, and just grab a few of the children out. And then, afterwards, like, well, you guys did a good job. Thank you for your help. I walk over. The teacup ride starts slowing down, and I see my biological father. I'm like, yeah, so can I get my purse back and my camera bag back? He's like, yeah, sure. What happened? You don't need to worry about anything. It's all good. Everything's handled and taken care of. Hey, James and Lydia, what's going on? And my biological mother was dizzy and, got really sick and upset, and it was what it was. And I'm just like, you guys have a good time. Did you spin it so fast? And my son and my daughter were like, yeah, we thought we saw you doing something. We tried to slow it down, but we already got it going. I know, good. I'm glad you had fun. Give me hugs. And so then at that point, I'm like, well, I guess better go. And so my children's biological father, and the two of them considered themselves brothers in arms, so the two of them come back and they're like, hey, what's going on? And I'm like, well, gotta go. There's some stuff that, my head hurts. I gotta get my son and my daughter going. Let's go. And because, I didn't want to be in the way. So, my son and my daughter got the little caricatures done, and then we went along, and, that's what happens. And, just another day at Lackland Air Force Base. That's all. And so, one day I'm in labor for however many weeks beforehand. Next couple of weeks go by and assisting where I can, in reference to the news. And then a few weeks later, and I'm healing things. And then a few months later, pregnant with my daughter, and you know. What's a day to anybody? It just depends on what your perception is, I suppose. And so it's just that linear time, whatever. And so I went and, you know, had a not as difficult of a time delivering my daughter, comparatively. Still, it was about 2 weeks in labor, but, you know. And then after delivering her, all of the staff were like, according to the notes, the notes from the prior situation, well, it was because of those people, it wasn't because of me. And so I started explaining, you know, this is what happened, this what happened, and the nurses and the doctors took notes, and they were just like, we apologize, you shouldn't have ever had to go through that. Yeah, well, you know, I did, so, you know, that doesn't fix everything, but that doesn't repair everything, but, you know, let's move along and get stuff taken care of, because it's important to. There's quite a few things that are going on at this point in time, and I don't need to be taking up this level of whatever at that point. And so they had a few more questions. I answered the questions, and they said that they were going to take care of the other situations on the other side, because basically it just really wasn't acceptable what happened, and they were correct. It wasn't acceptable how that went. And so the irony in a few years later and whatnot of that regard. And so yeah, that's the short of the long, you know, comparatively, in reference to being pregnant for 9.5 months for both my son and my daughter, because I had known that I was pregnant officially in the beginning of December, if not the end of November. So I really knew, like, I felt that I was pregnant. I didn't have the words for it so I felt it around the middle of November, but it wasn't officially confirmed until December. And the same with my daughter. So people at those times that knew me, they knew that I had been out of my coma for what length of time that I had been. They knew that the subarachnoid hemorrhage was still in the frontal lobe of my brain back then in 2000 and 2001 and in 2002. And again, the subarachnoid hemorrhage wasn't out of my brain officially until about the end of 2007. And but it was more along the lines of the subarachnoid hemorrhage still showed in the MRIs and CAT scans all the way till then. It wasn't as noticeable, or it started not being as noticeable around 2004, around about October-ish time frame. So that's that. So don't be jealous or envious of my labor and delivery. You know, certain things you just don't want to go in competition over, and that definitely would be one of them. I would guesstimate there is not one female who could truthfully say that they want to go in competition over that, as far as being in labor for that amount of time, while having a subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of their brain. I would also guesstimate there are a whole bunch of males and females who could say that they would not want to go into competition with being in the room with someone who is in labor for that amount of time. Yeah, I have a feeling. I could be wrong. I'm fairly certain I'd be fairly accurate on that. But, you know, since there are people who like challenges, I don't recommend it. What do I know? I only went through it. But, you know, if you feel all competitive, that there might be somewhere else that you could be competitive. That would be more beneficial. I can make fun of that. And it's not because I'm being selfish, it's just reality. I wouldn't recommend it. It just, that's why I fought to get a tubal ligation every year. I actually asked for a tubal ligation during my OBGYN appointments when I was pregnant with my daughter. I was like, I want a tubal ligation. Like when I deliver my daughter, can you just do a tubal ligation right there? And the OBGYN, well, why would we do that? You're young. Because I don't want any more children. After being in labor as long as I was with my son, I know that's going to happen with my daughter, so I don't want to give birth to any more children. Well, what if you don't have the relationship last? Well, that's fine. I'm okay with that. I'm perfectly fine with that. Well, what if you meet somebody else and they want to have children? Good for them. I don't feel like carrying any children. I don't want to have any children. If they have a child of their own, maybe. But that's not a guarantee at all. That's not a guarantee that I'm going to be okay with that. And so, I don't want to have any more children. It's just the reality. And after the labor and delivery part, I don't want to. After everything that I've dealt with, I don't want to. And so, well, what if this, what if that? I don't care. I don't care what the other whatever. He's going to have to understand that I don't want to. I've already gone through this. You can't get me into that. I'm not really interested. And so each year after delivering my daughter, it was, well, what if you get into a relationship and I don't care what they want. It's my body. I was in labor for 2.5 weeks. I don't want to. I don't want to deal with that. I'm done. So, can I get a tubal ligation already? And so from 2002 all the way until 2008 is when I finally got my tubal ligation. And I was like, thank you. Went to a civilian doctor. The guy was like, yeah, well, are you sure? Went through the same questions. And I laid it out. I was in labor for this long. I did this. I'm not willing to. I'm not willing to do it at all. I don't want to. I'm done. I don't feel like dealing with it. I don't want to have another child. The guy's like, okay, well, when do you want to get it done? And I looked at him, I said, well, when's your next appointment available? And he goes, well, tomorrow. And he was joking. He laughed when he said this. He goes, it's funny enough, I have an appointment tomorrow at 8 a.m. Oh, well, I'll be there. And he was like, wait, what? I'm like, oh yeah, no, I'll be there. What do I need to do? And all this sort of stuff, I'll take care of that because I'm done. I had my two. I only wanted 2 children of my biological own. That was it. I got my 2. I was done. And so okay, well, yeah, I guess we could do this appointment tomorrow. That works. Yeah, 8 a.m. Yeah, okay, you're pretty serious. Well, I know myself enough to tell you what I need. I'm not going to tell you something as a wasted time. If I tell you that I know for a fact what is best for myself, you better believe that I know what's best for myself. I'm the one who's dealt with everything that I have, so I know. And it wasn't being rude, it was just, this is the reality. So later on in 2012, telling the dentists, if you would just take care of my teeth the way I prefer, which is essentially removing all of my teeth and putting in the implants for my teeth, I'm still gonna have headaches, but my migraines won't be as bad. If you would just do that, it would make it easier for me instead. Especially after all the medications that I've been on, after all this, stuff as far as the after effects from my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000, after the subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain. I already know what I need. If you could just do that, it would actually be helpful for me. That'd be great, but I've already gone over quite a few things. I've had dentists that have said, well, we don't really no, because I already know what it is. I already know how this goes. So if you could just do it, well, I understand that you have other people that you can get the patient stuff from. It really is. So just, it would be great. It would be really helpful for my headaches and migraines. But, that would require it not taking the length of time that it has, especially with certain other things regarding certain supposedly responsible individuals as far as scuba dive instructors, and yet that situation that did not get handled correctly at all whatsoever. And so while some people might have thought it was funny that I dealt with Washington State because of the electrical stuff, I did not find that to be a funny joke. So if there's any connection as far as what happened with my daughter at McCoy Elementary School and the Fort Worth Zoo, that has anything to do, whether it has to do with my scuba diving and or that OBGYN grouping of individuals, well, there are those technological advances. And there would be that record of proof. And then there would be a lot of problems as far as stalking and harassing. And there have been issues in reference to where it's been known that certain people have needed to let certain things go. And if you happen to get in trouble and you did it wrong and you wanted to try to be egotistical, hypothetically in reference to my blue ID card, well, you do know that there are UCMJ standards, and you also know that as an officer, you are held to a higher standard than you are as enlisted. And so it's not the first time that I dealt with an officer having an attitude in regards of that OBGYN. Not at all. It just happened to be the first one at Lackland Air Force Base that I happened to have that situation with. He wasn't the first, and he obviously wasn't the last when you take in consideration Gilman and that situation regarding that Bronze Star trying to cover up the dress blue situation picture that I was interrogated for several hours at Fort Sam Houston after my children's biological father's death, which happened to be of mixed medication overdose because he wanted to pretend that he was dealing with the after effects that I deal with. And he was essentially doing what I was accused of, which was malingering. And no, I deal with headaches. Now in 2021, it's been 21 years since I woke up. I've had to learn how to work through things, and make it easier for myself, since nobody else has actually done what I actually need for myself. And so I've done what I've needed for myself. Again, these tattoos, I wouldn't have gotten tattoos if I didn't have issues with the after effects of my head injury. But of course, there's the assumption because I was born and raised in New Jersey. And sure, while I've known people, I guarantee you, people that I knew weren't getting tattoos that are the way my tattoos are. So there's that. That's been a situation. But in reference to the CID investigation, in quite a few references, you just need to accept the fact that you need to let certain things go. Because quite frankly, it's really sad. Especially in regards to, they didn't even contact the Chief Warrant Officer 3 that went to Fort Worth. The CID agents that had later brought in who was an E7 but then bumped up to an E8 over the weekend. I mean, I thought that there was a few weeks of training that went on when you go from an E7 to an E8. But apparently, over from a Friday and then learning he was direct ordered not to show up to that funeral in Fort Worth. And then on Monday, he was an E8. He got pinned and everything. I mean, I've seen and known that to happen, but usually before you get pinned, you have to go certain areas and do that. It was literally Friday, Saturday, Sunday. All of a sudden, he was a E8. Those who have been in the military, you would know whether or not it's normal for an E7 to be an E8. You know, an E7 on Friday, E8 on Monday. I don't think so. And so, I mean, it can happen. It can. But it is what it is. And so I've been interrogated as far as that. And excuse me, I was a little bit busy. My subarachnoid hemorrhage, you know, in that reference had finally gone away a few months beforehand. But, you know, excuse me if I didn't think about the dress blue situation. I was taking care of my son and my daughter, among a few other situations. After the garage situation where I was forced into another thing in comparison to CID ever investigating, how I wound up off post. You know, instead of that didn't occur. That didn't happen. That probably wasn't even thought about until this video. But yeah, instead of them investigating that, I got interrogated for several hours and then went up the chain of command and all that stuff. And then General Gilman had called me a royal beeping female area. Yeah, well, thanks for noticing. I don't know how you noticed that, but there is a problem in regards to that. Nonetheless, it doesn't change the fact that that's a little bit sexist, don't you think? And what are you having anything to say in that in regards of, because what an irony if it wouldn't be if you take in consideration that OBGYN. And so, but there were a few other situations, and that was shortly before returning the Bronze Star, where I kicked General Gilman out of his office, and the colonel and his 2 aides were handed over the Bronze Star with the commendation, because I knew it was the cover-up from General Gilman as well as the general from Fort Hood in reference to the dress blues picture that was used during the memorial. And there was the Vietnam ribbon. Grandpa Nichols, my children's grandpa on their biological father's side, had done 4 tours in Vietnam. And Grandpa Nichols' rack, with the exception of 1 or 2, was pinned in reference to those pictures. And Grandpa Nichols had told Grandma Nichols, as well as his 2 daughters and his other son, that there was a problem and nobody wanted to listen to Grandpa Nichols. And so he warned them all that when it comes to that, there are guys who actually earn things. And when you actually earn something, it's taken really seriously. You know, like my scuba diving and what work I did and my books and my modeling and my website and a few other things that I haven't ever gotten recognition over correctly. And so there is that correctly part. So in that reference, the situations that have been needing to actually be taken care of correctly in my ways, in my, what have you, in comparison to, that kind of needs to be done correctly. And I don't like wasting time. I mean, you know, I didn't join the Air Force. I also didn't waste time to join the Army. I tend to zoom along naturally in comparison to the hurry up and wait situation that is unacceptable. And so, especially from someone who was born and raised in New Jersey and went to New York City, so accustomed to moving a lot faster than, you know, when you feel like getting around to it, you need to let it go and actually just do your job in a timely manner especially in regards to as much stuff has occurred needlessly. Because of other people's egos. But you know, it's going to be called the Space Force soon. And again, just like the Air Force. Guess where it came from? I was in the Army, but technically because of the Army and the Marine Corps and the Navy having taught me the stuff, and then my scuba diving with the Coast Guard, by technicalities, there's only one branch that didn't have something to do with that. For me, by technicalities. So, but there was this Irving situation, and so it still comes from the Army and General George Washington, Old Tenant Presbyterian Church. You know, as far as, because, you know, that was the Army. So anyway, I tend to be a little ornery. Yeah, and by the way, that's how you actually say, in reference to the ornery PSA, it's ornery PSA. That's actually how it's pronounced, ornery, in comparison to phonetically sounding it out. You say the ornery PSA by Susan MeeLing, or Reverend Susan MeeLing, or Lady Dori, Belle. I've been known by a few names. You guys go to my website, www.susanmeeling.com. Have a good one. This again is the 5th of November, 2021.